I'd like to wrap up our look at importing and linking CAD files in Revit projects with just a handful of tips that you might want to keep in mind when you're working with CAD files. So I'm in a file here called Importing Tips, and I'm in a drafting view that has an embedded CAD file in it. You can see that file right here. So the first thing I want to do is look at the query tool in a little bit more detail. We've discussed this in a previous movie, but if we click on query, what we haven't discussed yet is these buttons down here. Now you notice that there's a delete button and a hide in view button. Now that item that I just selected, this hollow metal frame right here, you can see is currently on a layer called A Detail Bold. And then down here, I could either delete that layer or hide it in the view. Now I'll show you delete in a minute. Let's do hide in view right now. So I'm going to click that, and you're going to see that that element disappears. Now, it turns out that was the only element on that layer, so that's the only element that disappeared. But if we repeat the process with one of these leader lines here, you can see that's on a layer called A&O Note. And if I hide that, then the effect is a little bit more dramatic because you'll see that all of those notes were on that same layer. So it makes it really easy for us to go in and hide layers that we no longer want to see. Now, I'm going to press Escape to cancel out of the query command. How would I get those layers back again if I later decided that I wanted to redisplay any of that information? Well, if you go to the View tab and look for the Visibility Graphic Overrides command. Now, this has a shortcut, VG, and you'll find that many people will execute this command by just simply typing the letters VG. So either way, you can click the button or use the shortcut, and you're looking for the Imported Categories tab. And what you'll see on this tab is any CAD file that's been brought into your project, whether you linked it or embedded it, will be listed here. And if you expand it with the plus minus sign right here, you'll see all of the layers that are in that CAD file. And you'll notice here that A&O Note and A Detail Bold are both currently unchecked. They're both turned off. And to restore one of those layers, it would be a simple matter of just simply checking the boxes again. And then when I leave this dialog, those layers will come back. Now, you'll also notice that we can override any of these layers if we wanted to as well. And that would include things like line weight and color or line pattern. Now, in this case, I'm just going to cancel without making any overrides. But if you ever need to make an override, you can do so. Now, you'll notice those layers are still turned off. Let's move this box over here. But if I click Apply, then they all come back again. If I'm done in this dialog, I can click OK. Now, what about the delete option? Well, if I select this and I go to Query again and pick that hollow metal frame again, this time, if I click delete instead of hide in view, the object also disappears. But here's the difference. If I type VG again, when I go back to the imported categories, you'll notice here on the list of layers that A Detail Bold is no longer on the list. So it's a little bit more permanent and a little bit more dramatic way to approach it. So what I'm going to do instead is go to undo here to bring that layer back. I think in most cases, doing hide in view is going to be a more appropriate way to deal with layers that you don't want to see. But certainly, if you absolutely don't need a layer and you want to try and reduce some of the file size, you could certainly look at the delete option as well. Any of the features that were available with the query tool were available for either linked or embedded CAD files. Now, this CAD file is actually an insert. This one's been embedded directly in this file. Most CAD or BIM managers would probably argue that you should use Link CAD exclusively. So if I look at my Insert tab, they would favor the Link CAD button over the Import CAD button. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but in most cases, that's going to be true. So if you can do whatever it is you need to do with the CAD file using Link, it's generally considered a best practice, better approach. But for the sake of argument, let's say that you have imported a CAD file. One of the things that sometimes people find a little tempting about importing a CAD file is this explode button over here. Now, I want to show you what this does because it's got some not so desirable side effects. So if I click on explode, at first glimpse, it seems a little attractive because what you'll see is that all of the individual parts and pieces inside that CAD file have now become dedicated Revit objects. Notice these lines are now actual Revit lines, and this text is now actual Revit text. And I could actually edit the note if I needed to change what it says or modify some of that line work if I wanted to change the detail in some way. Now, one of the downsides of exploding a CAD file is it tends to radically increase the file size in your Revit project. Furthermore, it tends to populate your Revit project with a lot of styles and text types and other types of types that you don't really want to have in your Revit project. So it increases the file bloat, if you will. So for example, if I select one of these lines, what you'll see is that line created a line style for itself called A Detail Fine. And if I open this list, there's actually a line style now for every layer that was previously in the CAD file. The same is true for the text. You can see that it's created text types called AutoCAD Detail Arial. So it's created a text type for every text style that was in the AutoCAD file. Furthermore, if you go to the Manage tab and go to the Materials dialog, you will see that down here, you're going to have lots of materials that are somewhat generic. They just say render material with 3 numbers after their names. Those numbers are the RGB values, red, green, blue values, of the color that was assigned to those layers. So every layer in your CAD file creates a render material for itself. And as you can see, they're all just sort of this gray material, but they have that color assigned to them from the CAD layer. Now, these render materials don't really help me at all in the Revit project. They just contribute to overall file size and file bloat. Now, you could certainly purge out and delete all of these items that you don't need, but that's a lot of extra work, and you might easily miss some and so on, and it makes it a little tougher to enforce Office standards. So if you're in a situation where you really have to explode a CAD file, a much better way to do it is to create a temporary Revit project first. Bring the CAD file into that temporary Revit project, explode it there, clean it up, and then just copy and paste that geometry out to your live project. This way, you're only getting the items that your project needs, and you're avoiding all that other stuff that you didn't want it to have. And if you follow that process, you can usually do a much cleaner job at bringing in that data.